name's Stewart Clarke. I'm the editor of TBI, Television Business International. And as I think everyone has probably worked out by now, in June, in the UK, where I'm from, we voted to leave the European Union by a narrow margin. And in many respects, I think the Brexit decision has thrown up more questions than answers. And the way forward isn't clear in many respects. And in terms of TV and media, I think today we can get into looking at some of the key challenges from a UK perspective, but also clearly thinking about international, and possibly some of the opportunities as well, because clearly there will be some of those as well. We've got a fantastic panel, so I'll start at this end and work back, if that's okay. So at the far end, we have John Enser, who is a partner at the media law firm Olswang, probably worked with several people in the room, works with many big media companies. Next to John, we have Amanda Groom, who is Managing Director of The Bridge. Now, that's a UK-based consultancy that effectively facilitates co-production and content agreements between UK companies and those in Asia and other parts of the world. Next to Amanda, we have John McVay, who is the Chief Exec of Pact, the association that represents UK independent producers, was instrumental many years back now in terms of getting the terms of trade brought through with the UK Communications Act, and is clearly at the forefront of working out what's next for the UK independent sector and the wider creative sector. To my immediate left, we have Richard Johnston, who is CEO of Endemol Shine UK, one of possibly the biggest production group in the UK, and obviously part of the wider Endemol Shine group, the huge production and distribution giant, effectively. So just to set things up, it was a fairly kind of seismic decision back in June, and as a journalist, kind of got straight on the phone, spoke to people, and there was a real sense of shock, I think, perhaps even a degree of panic. People from outside the UK didn't necessarily understand, why it happened and what had happened. And John, maybe I'm going to come to you first and ask, in that intervening period, which is not a great space of time, after that initial moment of, wow, what's just happened, in that intervening period, what have the key moments been, and how have particularly your members, with your Pact hat on, reacted and taken to what's happened thus far?
Well, I think that most of our members voted to remain. I would say, the majority of about 95% of the creative industries voted to remain. So there was a period of mourning. And
I think, sorry to jump in ahead of time, you would put this to your members, hadn't you? And it was a fairly overwhelming.
Yeah, we asked our member how they'd vote, and they voted 85-15. So it was a clear majority to stay. Unfortunately, the British people didn't quite agree with my members, which is bizarre, but never mind. I think the first thing was everyone sort of thought it was the end of the world, and the end of the world was just around the corner. And then, of course, when you sit back and actually do some analysis, particularly around some of the regulations, which are all still in effect. We haven't left the EU yet. We're still trading. We're still open for business. We're still doing all the work we did previously. People sort of, calm down, get on with the day job, and actually try and make things work. And I think that's generally how business is approaching it. Now, clearly, as we move to any notification of Article 50, which is the formal process of notifying that we're leaving the EU, then we enter a negotiation period with the European Commission and the rest of the EU states. Then things will become a bit more pointy as certain issues come down the track about access to market, freedom of movement, all those things which are actually very important for my members and indeed the broader production community in the UK and our colleagues in continental Europe. Then things will get a little bit more acute and more in focus. But right now, what those are, when those are, and how those are is pretty much unknown. And
we'll talk about some of the work you're doing to those ends. Richard, what was the immediate feeling in the office the next day? What was the immediate feeling from your people on the ground? And I wonder how has that mellowed, or I wonder how that has changed in the weeks since.
Yeah, I'll probably echo largely what John said. I think everyone was taken by surprise. I don't think many people predicted what happened, and to some extent we're all in an echo chamber. We're all talking to other people who broadly agree with us, and it was a real sense of surprise. So the office itself was, and we're a fairly multinational company, and we have many people from outside of the UK working with Endemol Shine in the UK. So a real sense of gloom, to be honest, on the Friday afterwards. But I think, as John has already alluded to, no immediate panic, I guess. I mean, I think nothing much has happened yet, in truth. Some macroeconomic things have moved, particularly around the pound, but actually in terms of the TV industry itself, it's fair to say so far there's not been much of an impact. It's all obviously going to be about what happens next.
Of course. And then, John, what were you're clearly familiar with all of the directives, regulations, and instruments at the EU level that currently affect the UK. What are the key ones that people in the production and distribution sector need to be mindful of?
Well, Stewart, I think it all comes from the fact that Europe is about for freedom. So the EU is all about free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. And you need to think about how each of those is potentially impacted by a Brexit. So when you're talking about free movement of people, then that's about incoming employees working in the creative industry in the UK. It's about the ability of UK creative people working in the TV industry and otherwise, moving freely across Europe without having to stand in long passport queues. When you're talking about goods, it's about shipping physical product, a bit of a historical interest largely in this room.
In so much as the DVD market.
Yeah, the DVD market is moved, but it still matters because most DVDs, there are still lots of DVDs sold. There is no meaningful pressing plant in the UK. Those are going to have to all be imported. So there are issues about free movement of goods, but I think most importantly, it's about free movement of services because that's what our industry is based on. So it's about the ability of UK creators, program makers, distributors to be able to sell their content around Europe and for broadcasters to be able to remain in the UK and broadcasting their channels in Europe with freedom of reception, with the ability for those channels not to be regulated again in other European states. So those are the four key benefits, if you like, we get from the EU today.
And then, of course, and perhaps we'll come on to this later, there are core instruments and regulations, directives that are currently being reworked, aren't there, at the moment, such as AVMS and other key pieces? Sure.
So the implementation of free movement of services really through the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, the AVMS Directive, that basically says if you have a broadcast license in any member state, then no other member state can interfere with the retransmission and distribution of your channels. That's being renegotiated at the moment, and there's a draft of a new proposal working its way through the European legislative process.
And John, I'm going to ask you, just because we're speaking to you at the moment, but can you, we're in the UK, and clearly this dominates the news flow, so we're familiar with the sense of a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit, but can you explain perhaps for people from different parts of the world or who aren't in the UK specifically, what is meant by a hard Brexit, for example?
Well, that's an issue. People say that the Schleswig-Holstein question is supposed to be easy compared to the negotiations for Brexit. So a hard Brexit, broadly speaking, means the UK will withdraw entirely from the single market and will no longer have any of the benefits and will be reliant on the negotiation of a subsequent free trade agreement with the EU, at its worst, based solely on the WTO rules. So if you like, there's a spectrum in between the sort of a country like Norway, which sits just outside, politically and economically just outside the EU, which pays money into the EU budget, has most of the benefits, but isn't formally a member of the EU, and it has certain disadvantages from that. It doesn't have a voice at the negotiating table, through to that WTO solution where we sit very much on the outside.
And Amanda, we'll come to you one second, but John, can I just pick up on that point? What's the impact, as it looks increasingly likely that it will be a quote-unquote hard Brexit for independents in the UK?
Well, in terms of our ability to provide programming into the European market, which is a third of our exports, the creative industries in the UK, Europe accounts for about 42% of our exports. The rest of the world, 58%. and growing. That balance is shifting. So Europe's very important to us, but our programming is actually covered by a Council of Europe convention, which is outside of the EU. So we'll still qualify as European programming. So when we sell to a European broadcaster, we will still qualify under European works, not foreign acquired. And there is nothing in the AVMS directive that to change the Council of Europe Convention on the definition. Turkey is a signatory to that convention as well.
That's set in stone that UK originated programming will count as European works irrespective of where we head.
Under all the signatories to that convention. Not all EU member states are signatories to that convention, but it's not just about Europe. It's a Council of Europe convention that other people can join to help trade.
Because clearly that affects how people think about co-production and whether they want a UK partner, for example.
Yeah, but co-production treaties set outside the EU. I mean, we have co-production treaties with many member states which are nothing to do with the EU, and any nation can join into a co-production treaty, and that is decided by the sovereign governments of those countries, what's in the treaty. It's nothing to do with the European Commission.
No, but it's clearly important whether UK-originated work is designated as European or not.
And it is under the convention, the Transfrontier Television Convention.
You talked about the rest of the world, which is a nice segue to come on to Amanda. So you run an international business, but you work with UK producers and you link them up with those in other parts of the world. So does that mean, that fateful day in June that your phone was ringing off the hook and you had 10,000 emails?
Yes, pretty much. I think 10,001. Because I have been working with Asia for over a decade now, we almost have now a sort of a perfect storm. There's been a lot of hard learning in co-production with Asia. What has happened suddenly with Brexit, I think, and perhaps as a result of the panic, is that suddenly UK producers, not just UK, US, English-speaking producers, have realised what a phenomenal opportunity there is in Asia. And perhaps, if you like, out of desperation, suddenly my phone certainly has been pretty busy. But it is more than just that. It is also a perfect storm. All of the hard learning that has happened with Asia, Asian co-production partners, Asian platforms, Asian business arrangements, strategic alliances, has all of that learning really now has come to make dealing with Asia more straightforward than it ever has been. It is notoriously difficult. It doesn't have to be difficult. There are people now increasingly who've proved that the co-production model works. British production companies, Denham's, Blink, Argonon, Tinopolis, of course, and various others.
And Amanda, when we're talking about Asia, which is clearly a huge continent with lots of different cultural differences, and within that, I think specifically in many cases we're talking about Korea leading the way in terms of forging that UK Asian co-production piece, at least.
Yes, good question, Stewart. I'm not talking from my particular angle about Hong Kong or Singapore, the English-speaking Asian areas. I'm talking about what I call real Asia. So, within real Asia, if you like, South Korea plays a very pivotal role. It really is a gateway in terms of production, content, and commercial, Western-focused commercial business practices. And the impact, the power of Korean content and Korean business across all of Asia is phenomenal. And by that I'm meaning China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Taiwan, Japan. Because Korea is such a strong gateway, what we're noticing now is the production partnerships that are going through Korea are in fact reaching into all Asia.
And presumably the UK, because of the pound, falling off the edge of a cliff, is a more affordable part, or the economics are more attractive. I mean, John, are you seeing that as well in terms of the effect? The currency? What impact does the pound, the trajectory of the pound have upon your members? Is there a direct impact?
No, not really. Well, I mean, you'd have to talk to my distribution members in terms of how they do their sales and how they're hedging across currency fluctuations in their major markets. In terms of the production side, it doesn't have an immediate impact. What it does do is it's driving a lot more inward investment. There's a lot more American shows about to arrive in the UK. And because of the exchange rate is very favourable against the dollar, so we will be seeing a lot more big budget American shows being made in the UK. Those tend to have an upward push on some of our key talent costs. So that'd be the sort of day-in problem. That's the sort of immediate problem.
But Richard, is that your experience? Because clearly if the UK is a more affordable place to work and there's a tremendous skilled pool of producers, crews, etc., that could have a positive impact.
It could have. It's sort of, I think, in answer to the question you just asked John, it's too early really for TV works in quite long cycles, and so I think buying decisions and producing decisions are made kind of 6 months, 12 months hence. So I think the effect of the pound is too early to tell, I would say. But if it's a long-term phenomenon that the pound is now worth 110, 115, whatever, then I think that will gradually have an impact on the sort of things you're talking about.
And I would imagine for your business, Richard, that the key. So, John Enser outlined some of the kind of the core tenets of the EU. I guess the freedom of movement of people is a key concern for a big production group such as yours.
It is. It's our major concern, to be honest. We employ a very large amount of people from all over the world, and particularly from the EU. But wider than us, it's really a big issue for the whole industry. If you look at sort of inward flows, first of all, you look at the number of productions being made over here. John just talking about some of the US studios producing here. The harder you make it for people to come in and to talk even this morning in the Telegraph about people needing to have a Home Office pushing forward things about people having to have a job before they can come into the country. Rather than just the slightly more fluid way it is at the moment. Those are big barriers, and if you're going to make it harder for companies to come in here and produce, that's going to have a really big effect on all the fantastic progress that's been made with tax credits and everything else.
Not only production talent, but corporate talent as well. I mean, yeah. I would imagine, I know even my office is a big publishing conference company that's very, very international. I think that's the norm, isn't it, in most big...
It is. It's great. And UK, I think, has benefited hugely from being this amazing creative hub, arguably the world's leading creative hub. And any barriers to freedom of movement are going to affect that. I think it's undeniable.
We risk diminishing, I'm saying that as someone who's from the UK, but does it risk diminishing that status of the UK as perhaps the leading international creative hub?
It definitely does. And, as we keep saying, it's too early to tell where things like freedom of movement are going to fall. But the more barriers and the more restrictions that are placed, the harder it will be.
Just to give a bit of sort of facts on that as well, the UK's creative industries are about 11% non-UK residents who work in the industry. That splits roughly 6 EU, 5 rest of the world. So we actually have become very good, and they're mostly high-skill jobs. This isn't what the British public was worried about. In terms of people coming and taking jobs as fruit pickers or labourers or builders or the things that the voters thought, that demographic isn't what's in the UK's creative industries. By and large, the skills we have are all at the top end. We've recruited great people from around the world to work in our businesses, and that has made us better. I mean, one of my arguments to government is if we can't access global talent, then we won't be as good, because by that combination of the best of British talent and the best of the rest of the world's talent is what's led to us being one of the most competitive audiovisual and creative sectors on the planet.
And presumably we're seeing in the finance sector that several other European cities, several countries, but particularly cities, are seeing themselves or positioning themselves as an alternative to London, for example, making themselves more receptive to financial institutions. Will we see that happening in the same way in terms of the TV piece? Why wouldn't Hamburg, Amsterdam, any other city, it would be very natural, wouldn't it, to grasp this as an opportunity to position themselves as this big, creative, international TV and media hub?
The morning of the referendum, I got phone calls from several of my sister organisations around Europe. So I won't name them, they're very nice people, and they all went, "Oh, John, it's terrible, we're going to miss you, oh, the poor Brits, oh my God." And I went, "I know, I can't believe it, this is awful." And they went, "You're not going to get more competitive, are you?" I went, "You know what, we might, actually. I don't assume that this is all a slam dunk. There is a reaction and opportunities that we will have to take because we are looking at a completely different world. And for the UK's economy and creative industries, we can look at a whole range of things. Our tax credits will be subject to EU prohibitions.
More generous tax breaks.
Well, I don't know if they'll be more generous, but we can do them differently. There's lots of things we can look at.
Richard,
so I think although Hamburg, Berlin and wherever will quite rightly look to compete, don't assume that we're just going to sit our hands and do nothing.
Sure. But Richard, two questions. One, in terms of tax breaks, as pots of money perhaps did go away that we were accessing from the EU, thinking about, is there a possibility that there's a case for moving for either more generous tax breaks or alternatively pushing into other areas, perhaps?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that's been talked about, and John, you may know where this has got to better than I, but the high-end factual, I think, is an area which I think we'd love to revisit again and see if the very successful the effect that the tax credits had on drama and on animation could be widened to other genres. They seem to have been hugely successful. They seem to be a net plus for the Treasury. So let's widen them further if we can. And obviously, one of the effects of Brexit will be the removal of any issues around state aid, potentially, which again should give us more flexibility into how those credits work and as you say, maybe more generous or wider.
Is that a conversation that started, or is that something that is perhaps to think about in weeks and months to come, in terms of widening to perhaps high-end factual?
Well, it's certainly a conversation that's been going on anyway, but I'm hoping that conversation can now accelerate amongst all the other priorities that...
Well, that's a good point. And John, if I come to you, in terms of thinking about what happens next, presumably the UK government has got limited resources in terms of negotiation and such like. Where does media even fit into that piece when there's also the automotive industry, there's finance, there's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I think that's one of the roles of the creative industry needs to make the case that it is important, and John has certainly been leading that. The broader UK creative industries are over 8% of UK gross value added, and they are important, but government doesn't necessarily see that. When the last government set out their list of 9 key industrial strategy areas, the creative industries wasn't on that list, and that upset a lot of people in the industries at the time because it kind of, come on guys, you've missed an opportunity here. So we're playing catch up from that perspective. It's going to be these negotiations are going to be very complicated, and the German automobile industry might be pushing to make sure that there are good access to UK car manufacturers, and there might be something traded off against that, and we'd like to say, okay, in return for that, please Germany make sure that British broadcasters are not damaged in terms of the post-Brexit environment. But it's a very, there are lots of moving parts, and it's still quite early to see how that will shake out.
I'll come to you, John. Amanda.
And just to add to that and echo that, what I find on a daily basis, wherever I am in the ASEAN region or Northern Asia, is that the creative industries, particularly of the UK, punch so high above their weight that it is a thing of real value. So any dent in that will have a knock-on impact, of course.
John, is there something... So you are chief executive of Pact, which represents TV producers, but I know you're also working with the Creative Industries Council. Now, is the effective way to take, to work out what the issues are, to negotiate as a block that is bigger than just TV?
Yeah, what we've done is hard on the heels of the referendum. The Creative Industries Council is a sort of a private sector organisation that's recognised by government as a council that it has to consult with. So we were asked, and I got asked to chair the working group in order to produce a report for government, which will be going to government imminently. And that report is across fashion, music design, craft, TV, film, computer games, music, all of the creative industries in the UK. And what the report does is effectively make the argument on why we should sit alongside automotive, financial services as one of the key industrial sectors that the government must look to factor in positively into its Brexit discussions and the future negotiations, because we are actually, the UK's creative industries are growing faster than any other part of the UK economy, sometimes 3 times faster than most of our highest next parts of the economy. So we're very important, wealth creating, job creating, and exporting. And I think that's the thing about the tax credits and about Amanda's point, which comes together, is the UK is the second largest exporter of TV, but we're also a dominant exporter in many of our other creative industries. So we actually stand in a very strong position, and with the right government support, we can do even better. And Asia's important. Actually, America is more important to us than Asia right now.
But each one of those sectors within that creative sector is distinct and has its own
Yeah.
set of
We're all very
problems.
special. Yeah.
Yeah, quite so. But that being the case, each one has a different set of requirements, obligations, and such like. Is it realistic to actually house them all under one creative industry banner, if you like?
Yeah, because the business issues are exactly the same. Freedom of movement, freedom of capital, freedom of services, all those things apply whether you're in fashion, television, music, computer games. They're all the same. There are fundamentals, and there are the fundamentals that we have become used to because we were part of the EU and we were subject to the rules and regulations and the benefits. So that's how we've developed our businesses in that context. As we move away from that context, those things are still important. The solutions will be different, but those fundamentals will still remain as important parts for us.
So if your job in chairing that or producing this piece of work for government was identifying the key issues and the key opportunities, John, what can you share with us as to what they are?
I would say access to global talent. That's not just EU, that's global talent. That's a key one. Any tariffs or trade barriers is a problem for us. Freedom of movement. I mean, if you look at a production company right now, can basically get on a plane, train, and be somewhere in Europe to film something and be back in London to get it cut that evening. We don't have, I mean, when I was producing in Germany, I used to have to go through carnets and border controls, and when I remember going to East Berlin, the best way to get through the East Berlin controls was put a bottle of scotch in your camera case. We don't want to go back to those days, but I don't think our colleagues in Europe want to have the same experience coming to the UK. So I think there will be things that will change, but I think there is a recognition that there's a reciprocity of movement and services and tourism and production, and all our orchestras make all their money in Europe. They tour in Europe to make their money. Our musicians, our production companies easily move around Europe and vice versa. Those are important parts.
But clearly, free movement of people, in particular in terms of access to talent, is very important, but doesn't it fundamentally go against what the people in the UK voted for and which the UK Prime Minister now says she's going to enact? In that you can't have one piece without another, if you see where I'm coming in terms of...
Well, but as I said, 6%, 5% of the 11% of non-UK working in our creative industries are not from the EU. They're subject to different rules and regulations anyway. So it's nearly 50-50. So I think it's not beyond our abilities or our conversation with our government to come up with mechanisms that will allow us to recruit and for people to be recruited and to work in our businesses.
John, do you think it's realistic that we can have a degree of free movement within the Brexit negotiations for a particular sector, for example?
It's not beyond the realms of possibility, but I think you're right. I think what you said before in terms of the government's position with the hard line on free movement of people makes it quite difficult to get easy exceptions through that. And I think it's a very complicated question, because I don't think many of the people who voted for Brexit were voting on that agenda, but I think there are some UK constitutional issues going on at the moment. We have a court case arguing about whether the notice has been given to leave Europe without a positive vote from the UK Parliament, which hasn't happened yet. So that case is in court today. And so I think it is possible. I think the other European countries are at the moment making very hardline noises, and they are saying you can't cherry pick the best of Europe. You can't have the benefits of free movement for your film and TV industry, whilst at the same time denying free movement of workers to agricultural workers, what have you. And they're saying that for very good political reasons, both in terms of their own economy, their own politics, and in terms of the pan-European politics, which is UK cannot be seen to have a good deal, because if the UK is seen to have a good deal, then we have the French elections coming along next spring and so on. There's a lot of other things that hang on the UK. It shouldn't be seen as a good thing. It's easy to get out of Europe.
I mean, John, that being the case, that makes it an extremely challenging. You can make an economic case, but irrespective of how the numbers stack up, it's against the principle of Brexit. It's going to be very challenging for you to win that argument.
No, I think there will be controls. I mean, that's what Brexit means. There will be controls on migration into the UK. What those controls are, where they are, how they're finessed across different sectors, it won't be one size fits all. We don't have that currently for non-UK immigration. It's done by sector. So there are ways to look at this that aren't saying you can't work in the UK, or I can't recruit from Spain or India or Asia or America. You can right now. We do it right now. It's how we will have to finesse that going forward. But I agree with John. I mean, the idea that it's a sort of open door, as we've had previously, that is definitely not what it's going to be. What it will be, I think it's very hard for anyone to really know, because our financial services have the same issues. They recruit from around the world to bring the best talent into the financial services in London. Our legal professions do the same. So it's a very existential issue for our government to come up with a system which is reasonable and fair and transparent.
Richard, people in the UK will recognise this, but certainly the right-wing press has demonised the EU in many respects in terms of bureaucracy and layers of red tape and crazy regulation, which may or may not be the case. But I wonder, are there any? I'm trying to think of this. If there are any positives, are there any layers of bureaucracy that actually hinder what you do? Whether that's in terms of working practices and such like that may go away with Brexit not being there.
I doubt it, to be honest. I don't think there'll be huge changes in the sort of labour laws that have come down from Brussels. I think they've all been passed by UK Parliament, and I can't see that's going to be a priority to change those. So no, I don't think we've ever felt there was any sort of bureaucracy coming down that hindered us in any way.
Sorry.
The main point I want to make actually was just going back to what John was saying about the Creative Industries Council, because I think it's all these issues are very open issues at the moment, and I would just encourage everybody from every organisation, whether the big ones, large ones, small ones, and everyone who cares about the creative industries, I think let's see what comes out of John's report. I'm sure there'll be some well-constructed lobbying points, and then I think it's incumbent on all of us, because these are very, very open issues. Whatever we thought of Brexit, whether we were for it or against it, I think no one wants the UK economy to be adversely affected by it wherever possible. So despite the issues around what the right-wing press may have said and what some voters' issues on immigration were, I think it's incumbent on us to make the economic arguments as forcefully as we all can and get the absolute best settlement.
One thing
so what John's doing, I think, is going to be absolutely key.
And how much of that will be made public, John, to that point? How much will we understand?
I don't know yet, because it's a report for government. It's not an external. So I would encourage government to allow us to publish, but they've not got it yet. They've not seen it. They've not given a view yet. So I wouldn't want to be presumptive. I'm just a mere foot soldier and have to do something.
But what we will have is, I think, hopefully regardless of its, publishing the report, will have 7 or 8 very clear lobbying points, which I hope the whole industry can get behind and push in every which way we can, because other industries do it. Despite the brilliance of John, there's other industries do it much more, in a much more heavily resourced way than we do.
Yeah, if you're talking financial services, you get 6 people in the room. If you're talking to creative industries, it's thousands. So that's part of the problem for politicians, that they don't have enough bandwidth to talk to TV separately, to music separately, because they are trying to work all this out, and it's important. I would endorse Richard's point absolutely, that if you're in the UK creative industries, then get behind the agenda, because we have to convince the politicians that we matter as much as financial services.
Richard, is there, looking at the pots of money available, because we pay into the UK pays into the EU, there's a lot there for training and for skills for writers, directors, and for also, producers and such like. If they go away, and assuming that they're not matched like for like, is it kind of the up-and-comers? Is it the next wave of producers and technicians and such like that are hit hardest? And that must be a concern for you, because your business is built upon there being, a regenerating wave of creative people.
Well, it will certainly, for companies like us, it's probably less of an issue than it is for smaller companies who rely on, to some extent, on funding from the EU, but I think that one of the things that'll come through this again is how those are replaced. And if they're not, of course, it will have an adverse effect.
The big problem is we don't actually know how much money we get from Europe. We pay money into the European Commission. It comes out through various initiatives, the Creative Media, Horizon Programme, social funding, regional funding. So I might be a small gallery setting up in Cornwall in the remote southwest of England, and I don't get any creative money, Creative Europe money. I get my local council's money, which is actually European money, but was actually money we gave Europe in the first place. So the problem we have in the creative industries, and it's a very good question, is how do we get back, if we Brexit hard, as it would be, how much money did we pay into Europe that supported the creative industries, and how do we know we're going to get all back for us to spend on our creative industries? That's another question which the government doesn't actually know, and neither do the creative industries, because there's direct funding and indirect funding, so it's quite hard to know exactly how much.
And we're running out of time, but there's another issue that we need to cover, and that is with certain pieces, EU instruments being either renegotiated or reworked. John, if I can come to you on this, does the voice of the UK at the table become much? Is it diminished? Do we even have a voice as we're effectively leaving, and in fact other territories may seek to establish some sort of dominance or punish the UK in some respects?
Sure. I mean, look, in terms of things going through at the moment, in particular the potential new copyright laws and the AVMS directive, the UK still formally has a seat at the table until we formally leave. But in terms of how loud that voice is considered and how much noise we can take, it's clear that we are in a subtly different position than the position we were in before. And actually the government itself is a bit ambiguous about this, and the UK government has been sort of taking a back seat in some of these issues when it really should have been fighting for the front foot, because frankly, even if we leave and even if we hard Brexit, then UK companies are going to be impacted by this. So if you're a UK producer and you sell a programme to a French broadcaster, you're still going to be impacted about how portability rules, how territorial exclusivity works between that French broadcaster and your other customers across Europe. So the UK, it still matters to the UK industry, and the UK government ought to still be out there, even if it can still form part of a blocking minority at the moment, and that's the key thing, and they need to get out there and make sure they're doing that.
It must change the nature of negotiations when we voted for Brexit. John?
Yeah, it does, but it's not put me off. We still have, and I think it's important for every single producer and distributor in the room that we do something to get rid of the country of origin principles on VOD services, which the Commission want to bring in under the new regulation. That will completely destroy our businesses. It will remove through the back door our exclusive territorial licensing. It's a direct attack on our property rights, and whether I was leaving the EU or not as the UK, it's something that needs to be fought for everyone, because it is deeply damaging to our ability to get value pricing for our properties as we sell into the different territories of Europe.
We've got time just about, excuse me, for a couple of questions. Does anyone have a question? If so, put your hand up, please. Okay, well, we appear to have resolved the matters at hand.
Or we've depressed everyone, so yeah.
Well,
Okay.
could I just offer a note of optimism, because it has sounded, we know it's not all depressing, but in this time of uncertainty, it doesn't hurt anyone to look further afield. There are pots of funding, highly talented people, digital corridors, IP protection schemes, etc., all across Asia. So basically, whilst all this uncertainty is going on, it certainly doesn't hurt to broaden horizons.
So give Amanda a call.
Please do.
Just very quickly to round off, and we're going to have to do this within the space of a minute or two. If I can just run down the panel and ask what is, as over the next couple of years the UK leaves the European Union, what is the best and worst case scenario? Richard.
Right, I mean, probably come through from our conversation. The worst case scenario is we get the barriers up. It gets harder to make programs in the UK because we can't get the talent in. It gets harder to make programs overseas because of no one goes and makes programs in the States, for instance, if you're not from the States, because it's so flipping complicated partly. So that's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that we, through John's efforts and plenty everyone else's efforts, we get our voice heard, and we get these, get some of these, key points that we're pushing for.
John, do you have something to add?
Worst case scenario is vindictiveness as a punishment for the UK choosing to leave continues as a political theme in Brussels and across Europe. I think that's wrong. We import a lot of goods, services and products from the continent into the UK. That's as important for their economies as our exports are to us. So I would hope that politicians start moving away from punishment and actually get into looking to long-term what is actually in the interests of their economies, their citizens, and both for the UK politicians, but also the European politicians, and people stop using the language of punishment and retribution.
Amanda.
For me, best case scenario, people do look further afield and start to tap into the funding, the talent, and the eagerness to work with Western producers. Worst case scenario is, as we said, because of restrictions of movement of people, that UK creativity suffers a blow to its reputation, which then will extend, of course, across Asia, across the world.
And John, I would imagine you're going to be extremely busy over the next couple of years. Not that you're not anyway, but what's your best and worst case scenario for the media sector?
I was going to say, worst case scenarios for the legal profession is that nothing happens because then we don't get paid. But for the media sector, I think John is right that the worst case is we end up with trade wars and protectionism and barriers going up, and actually that there is, one of the things we haven't talked about is the sort of environment in the UK, and a lot of the people from other places in Europe saying, do I really want to be in the UK? Because it doesn't feel like a very friendly, nice place to be anymore. It feels, little-minded and xenophobic, and so that's the worst case, is that actually people kind of make a decision and that undermines our creative hub. Best case is that we take advantage of the international opportunities in our territories. It sharpens our competitiveness a bit, and that there is only minimal damage done to our ability to trade with Europe.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much. Clearly the start of the conversation in many respects, but a really great panel. So thank you to John, Amanda, John and Richard. Please join me in saying thanks to the guys.